The morning of my grandson's graduation, I woke up at 5:30. Not because of an alarm. I haven't needed an alarm in 11 years. My body learned long ago to wake before the day asks anything of it, a habit from the years when I had to have breakfast ready, lunch packed, uniform ironed, and a small boy out the door by 7:15, all before the sun had fully decided whether it was going to show up. I lay in bed for a few minutes in the dark, and I thought about those mornings. 11 years of them. The early ones, when Ryan was 7 and still cried sometimes in the night for his mother, and I would sit on the edge of his bed and say nothing, just be there, because there was nothing to say that would make it true that she was coming back. The middle ones, when he was 10 and 11 and 12, and turning into someone, a real someone, with opinions and jokes and a way of tilting his head when he was thinking that reminded me so much of his father at that age that it sometimes stopped my breath. The recent ones, the last few years, when he was nearly a man and our mornings had become quiet and companionable. Two people who knew each other, completely moving through a shared space without needing to fill it with words. 11 years of mornings. And this one, this particular Saturday in June, was the last one. The last morning before he walked across a stage and received a diploma and became, officially and completely, his own person. I got up. I made coffee. I pressed my best suit, the dark grey one I had bought for his middle school graduation and worn twice since. I polished my shoes. I made us both breakfast, though Ryan was still asleep, and his would need reheating. I was happy, genuinely, completely happy, the kind that sits quietly in your chest without needing to announce itself. And then, at 8:17 in the morning, my phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. I answered it, and a voice I hadn't heard in 9 years said, "Harold, it's Monica." I stood in my kitchen with a cup of coffee in my hand, and I felt the happiness shift, not disappear, not shatter, shift, make room for something else. Because Monica was Ryan's mother, and she had chosen the morning of his graduation to call. My name is Harold Vance. I'm 68 years old. I was a school principal for 24 years. I raised my grandson alone from the age of 7 until the age of 18. And the day she came back was the day she learned that 11 years leaves marks that a phone call cannot erase. Let me take you back to the beginning, because this story doesn't start on graduation morning. It starts 22 years earlier, when my son David was 26 years old and brought home a woman named Monica Chen and told me he was going to marry her. I want to be fair to Monica, even now, even after everything. I want to be fair, because fairness is the thing I taught for 24 years, in classrooms, in hallways, in the principal's office, where I sat across from children who had done wrong things and tried to help them understand why, without destroying their sense of themselves in the process. Fairness is not the same as kindness, and it is not the same as forgiveness. It is simply the commitment to seeing things as they are, not as you wish they were or fear they might be. So, fairly, Monica was brilliant. That is the first and most important thing about her. She had a mind that moved fast, faster than most people in any room she walked into, and she had learned early that this was simultaneously her greatest asset and her most significant social complication. She was not warm in the way that makes people immediately comfortable. She was warm in a different way, a way that revealed itself slowly, in small moments. Once she had decided, you were worth the effort. She was 24 when David brought her home. She was finishing a doctorate in biochemistry. She had published 2 papers already. She had plans, real ones, detailed ones, the kind that have timelines and contingencies and backup plans for the backup plans. David was, in many ways, her opposite. My son is, I say is, because he is still alive, still out there somewhere, and I have not stopped loving him, even when I have had to accept things about him that break my heart. My son is a gentleman, a genuinely gentle man. He has my height and his mother's eyes, and a quality of softness that was beautiful in a child, and that became, in an adult, something more complicated. He feels things deeply and has never fully learned what to do with what he feels, which means that his emotions, unmanaged, tend to overwhelm him at the moments when he most needs to be steady. Monica managed her emotions with precision. David was managed by his. It was, perhaps, a combination that was always going to struggle. But in the beginning, the early years, the first 3 or 4, they were good together. Monica's precision steadied David's drift. David's gentleness softened Monica's edges. They balanced each other in the way that opposite things sometimes do, before the weight shifts. Ryan was born when David was 29, and Monica was 27. He was, I will say this without apology, the most beautiful baby I had ever seen, and I had seen many babies in my years in schools. He had David's eyes and Monica's cheekbones, and a quality of alertness from his very first days that made you feel, looking at him, that he was already paying close attention to everything. The first 2 years were good. Then Monica's career accelerated in the way that brilliant people's careers sometimes do, suddenly, dramatically, with an opportunity that was genuinely extraordinary and that required, genuinely, an enormous amount of her time and energy and attention. And David, who had never been good at steadiness when things were difficult, began to drift. I want to tell you about the leaving carefully, because it was not a single moment. It was a process, a slow, terrible process that I watched from the outside, unable to stop it, able only to document it in my own mind with the helpless precision of someone who can see the shape of a disaster but cannot reach it in time. Monica's opportunity was a research position, a significant one, at an institution on the other side of the country. She had been offered it when Ryan was 2. She had turned it down. She had turned it down because Ryan was 2 and David was struggling, and she had made a calculation, as she made all calculations, clearly and without sentiment. But the struggle continued. And a year later, a version of the same opportunity came back, and this time, David told her to take it. I don't know exactly why he said that. I have my theories. I think he was tired of feeling like the lesser half of something. I think he told himself that distance would give him room to become someone more capable of being what she needed. I think he believed, the way people believe things they need to believe, that it would be temporary. Monica took the position. She was gone 3 weeks when David called me. He said, "Dad, I need help." I drove to his house the next morning. Ryan was 3 by then. He met me at the door in his pajamas with a piece of toast in his hand and said, "Grandpa, there's no milk," with the calm practicality of a child who has already learned to assess household situations. I bought milk. I stayed for the weekend, then I stayed for the week after. David was not well. I don't say that to condemn him. I say it because it is true, and because understanding it is necessary for understanding everything that followed. He was depressed, genuinely depressed, in the clinical sense of the word, and he had been for some time, and neither he nor Monica nor I had named it properly until I was standing in his kitchen, watching him try to make a decision about whether to have cereal or toast, and seeing him genuinely unable to decide. I got him help, a doctor, medication, therapy. I handled all of it, quietly, without making him feel worse about needing it than he already did. Monica came home for a week in December. She and David had long conversations behind closed doors. Ryan and I built a birdhouse in the garage during those conversations, a project I invented to give us something to do with our hands while the adults decided things. After she left again, David told me what they had decided. They were separating, not divorcing. Not yet, they said, separating. Monica would stay at her position. David would keep Ryan and begin treatment properly and try to rebuild himself. They would reassess in 6 months. I said, "And Ryan?" David said, "He's with me." I said, "David, are you able to?" He said, "Dad, he's with me. I can do this." I believed him. I shouldn't have, perhaps, but he was my son, and he believed it himself. And sometimes love makes you trust the person rather than the evidence. 6 months later, David called me again. He said, "Dad, I need you to take Ryan for a while." I said, "How long is a while?" He said, "Just until I get stable. A few months. 6 months at most." Ryan was 3.5 years old. He arrived at my house on a Thursday evening with a backpack that had a dinosaur on it and a stuffed elephant named Gerald that he slept with every night. He stayed for 11 years. I want to tell you about those 11 years honestly, which means I want to tell you both the hard parts and the beautiful parts, because there were both, in large quantities, often on the same day. The hard parts first, because they deserve acknowledgement. I was 57 years old when Ryan came to live with me. I was still working, still a principal, still responsible for 430 students and 62 staff members, and a building that always needed something fixed. I came home tired in the way that people who work with children and crises all day come home tired, emptied out, needing quiet. And I came home to a small boy who needed everything, not in a demanding way. Ryan was never a demanding child, but children need everything, inherently, simply by being children. They need food at regular intervals and baths on schedule and stories before bed, and someone to check that they brush their teeth properly, and someone to notice when they're quiet in the wrong way, the way that means something is wrong rather than something is simply finished. I learned, in those first months, things about myself that I hadn't known. I learned that I was more patient than I thought. I learned that I was less naturally organized than I had believed. I could run a school, but running a home for a child required a different kind of organization, more constant and more personal, and I had to build systems from scratch. I learned that the love I had for Ryan, which had always been real, always been present, was capable of becoming something larger than itself when it became daily and necessary and completely unconditional. I also learned loneliness. Not because Ryan wasn't good company. He was extraordinary company, better with every year. But there is a particular loneliness in being solely responsible for someone. No one to check your decisions with. No one to say, "Do you think he's all right? Do you think this is normal? Do you think we should call the doctor?" Just you and the child and your best judgment every day. My wife Margaret had died 6 years before Ryan came to live with me. Cancer, quick and brutal, the kind that doesn't give you enough time to prepare even though you know it's coming. I had managed the grief of that. But Ryan's arrival reminded me of her in ways that were sometimes beautiful and sometimes almost unbearable, because she would have been extraordinary at this, and she wasn't here. Those are the hard parts. Now, the beautiful ones. Ryan is, one of the most remarkable people I have ever known, and I have known many people in my years in education. He had his mother's mind and his father's heart, which is perhaps the best possible combination. And growing up, he had a quality that I can only describe as presence, a way of being fully in whatever moment he was in, that made you feel, talking to him, that you had his complete attention. He was funny, genuinely funny, in the dry, understated way that sneaks up on you. He would say something so perfectly observed that you'd already moved past it before you realized it was hilarious. And then you'd be laughing 30 seconds later at something that happened half a minute ago. He got that from no one, as far as I could tell. It seemed to be entirely his own. He was kind, not performatively kind, not the kind that wants to be noticed, the quiet kind that does things when no one is watching. At 10 years old, he spent 3 months saving his allowance to buy a new backpack for a classmate whose had broken because the classmate was embarrassed about it, and Ryan had noticed the embarrassment and done the math silently and acted on it without telling anyone. I only found out because the classmate's mother called me. He was curious about everything: science, history, woodworking, cooking. He went through phases of deep obsession with different subjects, the way bright children do, and I tried to feed each one. We built things together in the garage. We cooked complicated meals on Sundays. We had a standing argument about whether mathematics was discovered or invented that went on unresolved for 4 years. Those were the beautiful parts. And through all of it, the hard mornings and the beautiful ones, the school events where I sat in the grandparents section and felt conspicuous and proud simultaneously, the parent-teacher conferences where I explained the family situation to teachers who received it with varying degrees of grace, the nights when Ryan was sick and I sat up watching him breathe. Through all of it, I thought about David and about Monica. David had not disappeared entirely. He called irregularly, sometimes months apart, but he called. He had gotten stable. The medication helped. The therapy helped. He was living in another city. He had a job. He was, by his own account, doing better. He sent money when he could, which was not always, and which I accepted, not because I needed it, but because I knew accepting it was important for him. He visited 3 times in 11 years. 3 times. I will let that number speak for itself. Monica had called twice in 9 years. Both times brief. Both times ending with some version of a promise to do better that was not kept. Ryan knew about both of them. I had never hidden the truth from him, not the full truth, which he might not have been ready for at 7 or 8 or 9, but the shape of it. His mother had gone away because of work, and staying away had become a habit, and habits are hard to break. His father was struggling with his health and doing his best from a distance. I had never, not once, spoken badly about either of them to Ryan. Not because I didn't have things to say, because he was going to have to form his own relationship with both of them eventually, and I was not going to poison that ground before he had the chance to plant something in it. That was the hardest thing I did in 11 years, harder than the sleepless nights and the school runs and the loneliness, keeping my mouth shut about the people who had left him and letting him find his own way to whatever feelings he was going to have about them. And then Ryan turned 18 and graduated, and Monica called. "Harold, it's Monica." I stood in my kitchen, with my coffee getting cold. I said, "Monica," she said, I know this is unexpected. I know I should have. I wanted to call before now. I said, "Monica, why are you calling this morning?" A pause. She said, "I want to come to the graduation." I stood very still. I said, "Today's graduation." She said, "Yes, I'm actually in the city. I flew in last night. I've been trying to work up the courage to call since yesterday. And I said, "Does Ryan know you're here?" She said, "No. I wanted to ask you first." I looked out my kitchen window. The sun was fully up now. It was going to be a beautiful day, the kind of June day that feels like a reward for having gotten through the year. Ryan's bedroom door was still closed. He was still asleep, probably dreaming about whatever 18-year-olds dream about on the morning of the day they've been working toward for 12 years of school. I thought about him at 7, arriving with a dinosaur backpack and a stuffed elephant named Gerald. I thought about the 3 times his father had visited in 11 years. I thought about Monica's 2 phone calls in 9 years. I thought about every school play, every science fair, every bad grade and good grade and sick day and triumph and disappointment. Every morning I had gotten up before the sun, and every night I had stayed up past midnight, helping with something that needed finishing. I thought about the ground I had refused to poison. And then I said something that surprised even me. I said, "Monica, that is not my decision to make." She was quiet. I said, "Ryan is 18 years old. He is an adult as of 3 months ago. Whether you come to his graduation is his decision, not mine. I am not going to tell you yes, and I am not going to tell you no." She said, Can you ask him? Will you tell him I'm here?" I said, "Yes. I'll tell him. What he does with that is up to him." I hung up the phone. I stood in the kitchen for a moment, then I walked down the hall to Ryan's door and knocked. He said, "Yeah." I opened the door. He was awake, lying on his back, staring at the ceiling with the particular expression of someone who has been awake for a while and has been thinking. I sat on the edge of his bed, the way I had sat when he was 7, and crying in the night. I said, "I need to tell you something before today starts." He looked at me. I said, "Your mother is in the city. She wants to come to your graduation." I told her it was your decision. He was quiet. For a long time. Outside, a bird was singing. The refrigerator hummed. The ordinary sounds of a house on an ordinary morning that was not ordinary at all. Ryan said, "What do you think I should do?" I said, "I think you should do whatever you actually want to do. Not what you think I want, not what you think she deserves, what you want." He looked at the ceiling again. He said, "I don't know what I want." I said, "That's an honest answer." He said, "What would you do?" I said, "I'd let her come. Not for her, for the version of yourself that's going to be 40 years old someday, looking back at today, wanting to know that you made the generous choice when you could." He thought about that. Then he said, "Okay." She was waiting outside the venue when we arrived. I had not seen Monica Chen in 9 years. She looked older, which is obvious, but more specifically, she looked like someone who had been living at speed for a long time and had recently noticed the cost of it. She was well dressed, as she had always been. Her hair was shorter. There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. She saw Ryan first, and something happened in her face that I was not prepared for. A complete and total collapse of the composure she had always maintained so carefully. Not dramatic, not performed. The quiet, private collapse of someone who has been holding something for a long time and has suddenly, unexpectedly, run out of the strength to hold it. She said, "Ryan." He looked at her for a moment. He said, "Hi, Mom." 2 words. 18 years of everything in 2 words. She hugged him. He let her. He did not hug her back immediately. There was a moment of stillness, of assessment, of a young man deciding something. And then his arms came up, and he held on, briefly, before stepping back. She looked at me over his shoulder. I nodded. Once. Nothing more. We went inside. The ceremony was everything a graduation ceremony is. Long, occasionally moving, punctuated by speeches that ranged from genuinely inspiring to well-intentioned. I sat next to Monica in the auditorium, which was not something I had planned or chosen. But the seating worked out that way, and I was not going to rearrange things to make a point. She cried when Ryan walked across the stage. I noticed this from the corner of my eye, without turning to look directly. I had my own response to manage, my own eyes, that were doing something I had not given them permission to do. After the ceremony, there was a reception on the lawn. Ryan found his friends, the people he had spent 4 years becoming close to, and we, Monica and I, stood together at the edge of things. She said, "He's extraordinary." I said, "Yes." She said, "You did that." I said, "He did that. I just made sure he had what he needed." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Harold, I owe you." I said, "Monica, stop." She stopped. I said, "I'm going to say something to you, and I want you to hear it completely before you respond." She looked at me. I said, "I don't need an apology. I didn't do what I did for 11 years in order to receive something at the end of it. I did it because he needed someone to do it, and I was the someone who was there. That's the whole story. She said, "That's not." I said, "I'm not finished." She was quiet. I said, "What I want you to understand, not for my sake, but for Ryan's, is that today is not a reset. Today is not a starting point. 11 years happened. He knows they happened. He is an intelligent, perceptive young man who has spent his entire conscious life understanding, at some level, that his mother was somewhere else. You do not get to arrive on graduation day and have that be the first chapter. It is not the first chapter. You are walking into a story that is already 11 years long." She was very still. I said, "If you want a relationship with him, a real one, you're going to have to build it slowly, on his timeline, with his permission, accepting that trust at this point is something he will give you in small amounts, and that every amount is a gift, not a right." I said, "And if you can do that, if you have the patience and the consistency to actually do that, then I will support it. Because he deserves to have his mother in his life if she is capable of actually being in it." I said, "But if you're here today because graduation felt like a milestone, and milestones create a sense of obligation, and in 6 months the obligation will fade and the calls will stop again, then I am asking you, clearly, to be honest with yourself about that, before you make promises to him that you won't keep." Monica looked at me for a long moment. Her eyes were very bright. She said, "You haven't changed." I said, 24 years as a principal. You learn to say the thing that needs saying." She almost smiled. A small, complicated thing that wasn't quite a smile, but was in the same neighborhood. She said, "I'm going to try, Harold. I mean that." I said, "I know you do. Try consistently. That's the only kind of trying that counts." That evening, after everyone had gone, Monica to her hotel, Ryan's friends to wherever young people go after the official celebrations end, Ryan and I sat on the back porch of our house, the house he had lived in since he was 3.5, the house with the garage where we had built things, and the kitchen where we had cooked complicated Sunday meals, and the bedroom where Gerald the stuffed elephant still sat on the top shelf of the closet, retired, but not discarded. We sat with drinks, lemonade for Ryan, iced tea for me, and the evening came down around us slowly, the way summer evenings do, reluctantly, as if the day doesn't want to end. Ryan said, "That was a lot." I said, "It was." He said, "She seems different than I thought she would." I said, "How did you think she would seem?" He thought about it. He said, "I don't know. More certain of herself, maybe. She always seemed, from what I remembered and from what I'd imagined, like someone who always knew exactly what she was doing." I said, "She is, usually. Today was not usual for her." He said, "How do you know?" I said, "Because I watched her for 10 years before she left, and I've known enough people in enough situations to recognize when someone is genuinely undone by something." He was quiet. He said, "Are you angry at her? Still, I mean?" I said, "I'll be honest with you, because you're 18 and you deserve honesty. I was angry for a long time. The first few years, yes. I was angry in a way I didn't always know what to do with." He said, "What did you do with it?" I said, "I got up in the morning and made breakfast and drove you to school. That's what I did with it. There wasn't time for it to be anything else." He smiled at that, the dry, understated smile I had watched develop over 11 years into something all its own. He said, "And now," I said, "now I'm 68 years old, and I'm sitting on my porch on the evening of your graduation, and I stopped. I looked for the right word. I said, "I'm full. That's the word. I feel full. Not angry. Not sad. Full." He looked at me. He said, "That's a good word." I said, "It's an honest one." We sat in the quiet for a while. The neighborhood sounds came and went. A dog somewhere, a car, Children playing late on a summer evening. Ryan said, "Grandpa." I said, "Yes." He said, "I want you to know something." I said, "All right." He said, "I know what you did. I don't mean the practical things, the breakfasts and the school runs and all of that. I mean, I know what you chose. You chose to stay when you didn't have to. You were 57 years old and retired, and you chose to start over for me. I've known that for a long time. I just haven't said it." I didn't say anything. He said, "And I know you never said anything bad about either of them. Not once. I noticed that. I noticed it when I was little, and I've thought about it a lot since. You could have. Anyone would have understood, but you didn't." I said, "It wasn't for them. It was for you." He said, "I know. That's what made it. That's what made it the thing it was." He reached over and put his hand on mine briefly, the way young men do when they want to say something that is bigger than what they can say, and then took it back. He said, "Thank you." I sat on my porch in the evening quiet, and I thought about 11 years. About Margaret, who would have loved him so much. About David, somewhere out there, who had missed it. About Monica, in a hotel room somewhere in the city, sitting with whatever she was sitting with. I thought about a 3-year-old with a dinosaur backpack and a stuffed elephant named Gerald. I said, "Thank you for letting me." Ryan is 21 now. He is in his 3rd year of university, studying, predictably, given the child he was, both biology and philosophy, because he decided he wanted to understand life from 2 directions simultaneously. His professors, from what I hear, find this either fascinating or exhausting, depending on the day. He calls me every Sunday, not because I asked him to, because he decided to, on his own, sometime in his 1st semester away, and has not stopped. Monica has been in his life for 3 years now, slowly, carefully, on his timeline, as I asked. She calls him. She visits twice a year. It is not a full relationship yet. It is the beginning of one, fragile and real, and being built brick by brick with the patience of people who know that what they're building matters. I give her credit for that. It would have been easier, in some ways, for her to have been overwhelmed by the distance and retreated into absence again. She didn't. She kept showing up. That counts for something. That counts for a great deal, actually. David came to Ryan's 19th birthday. It was the first time I had seen my son in 4 years. He looked well, genuinely well, better than he had looked in a long time. He and Ryan spent 2 hours talking alone in the garden, and I don't know what was said and I didn't ask. Ryan came inside afterward, and he had been crying, which he did not try to hide. And he said, "He's trying, Grandpa." And I said, "I know," and we had dinner. They are building something too, slowly, on their own terms. As for me, I am 68 years old, and I live in the same house, and I have the same porch. And every Sunday evening Ryan calls, and sometimes we talk for 20 minutes, and sometimes we talk for 2 hours, and it is never long enough, and always exactly right. I planted a garden 3 years ago, something I had never had time for when Ryan was young. I am not particularly good at it yet. The tomatoes are inconsistent, and I have lost 3 rose bushes to circumstances I don't fully understand. But I am learning, which is all you can ask at any age. I retired from the school properly the year Ryan left for university. 24 years. 430 students in my last year alone, and thousands over the full span of it. I think about them sometimes, the ones who struggled and found their way, the ones who didn't make it as far as they should have, the ones who sent me letters years later to say something had stuck. I got a letter last year from a student I had taught, or rather, whose principal I had been, 20 years ago. He was 40 now. He had a child of his own. He said he had been thinking about something I told him when he was 12, and in serious trouble, the kind of trouble that could have gone very badly. He said I had sat across from him in my office and said, "The story isn't finished yet, and the next chapter is yours to write." He said he had thought about that sentence almost every day for 20 years. I sat with that letter for a long time. The story isn't finished yet. No, it isn't. I want to leave you with something true. 11 years is a long time. It is long enough to watch a child become a person, long enough to learn things about yourself you would not have learned any other way, long enough for anger to become something quieter and more durable, long enough for love to stop being a feeling and become a practice, something you do every day, regardless of how you feel, because the doing is the point. I did not set out to raise my grandson. I set out to help for a few months, and the months became years, and the years became a life, a shared one, built in the ordinary materials of mornings and meals and conversations, and the specific texture of two people who know each other completely, sharing a house and a table and a life. I would not change it, not the hard parts, not the lonely parts. Not the mornings I was exhausted and the nights I was afraid I was doing it wrong. Not any of it. Because on the other side of all of it is a Sunday phone call from a 21-year-old with his mother's mind and his father's heart, who calls because he wants to, who says things that are bigger than what young men usually say, who is, by any measure I know how to apply, a good person. But that's the whole return on 11 years. That's everything. If you are raising someone who is not technically yours to raise, a grandchild, a niece, a nephew, a child who needed someone, and you were the someone who was there, I want you to know something. It counts. Every breakfast and every school run and every night, you sat on the edge of a bed saying nothing because there was nothing to say. It counts in ways that don't always show up immediately, in ways that sometimes take 11 years to become visible. It counts. And someday, on an ordinary evening on a porch somewhere, someone is going to say thank you in a way that fills 11 years of mornings all at once. Wait for that evening. It comes. I'll see you in the next one.